The Galactic Military Academy had seen thousands of species pass through its halls over the centuries, but none, and I mean absolutely none, had caused as much quiet unease as the humans. Not because they were physically intimidating. Honestly, they looked like hairless bipedal primates who'd figured out how to wear uniforms. No, the unease came from something else entirely, something that made even the battle-hardened Krell instructors pause when assigning combat simulations. Commander Vex'thar, a four-armed Zenthari, with enough battle scars to write a history book, stood before the assembled cadets in Training Bay 7. His upper arms crossed while his lower ones gestured at the holographic display floating between him and the recruits. 47 species were represented in this cohort. Everyone from the insectoid Vryn to the crystalline, the mineral-based Quarians who refracted light like living prisms. And then there were the 5 humans, standing in a loose cluster near the back. Their names were Kenji, Amara, Dmitri, Yuki, and Hassan. A collection of designations from different regions of their homeworld that Vex'thar had needed 3 attempts to pronounce correctly during orientation. They stood with a casual posture that other species might mistake for inattention, but the commander had learned better over the past 6 months. Those soft eyes tracked everything. Those supposedly weak bodies concealed reflexes that defied logic. Today's exercise, Vex'thar announced, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into standard galactic, is a pacification scenario. You will enter the simulation as peacekeeping forces responding to a colony dispute. Your objective: contain the situation, minimize casualties, extract diplomatic personnel. Standard rules of engagement apply. A Vryn cadet, all 6 legs chittering with excitement, raised a foreclaw. Commander, will lethal force be authorized if the situation escalates? Only as a last resort, Vex'thar replied, his secondary eyes scanning the room while his primary ones focused on the hologram. The point of this exercise is restraint, tactical thinking, de-escalation. The Academy wants peacekeepers, not butchers. That's when Kenji raised his hand. The human was shorter than average for his species, about 1.7 meters, with dark hair pulled back in what they called a ponytail, and a perpetually calm expression that somehow made Vex'thar more nervous than if he'd been scowling. Yes, Cadet Kenji. Sir, permission to speak freely about the simulation parameters? Vex'thar's mandibles twitched, the Zenthari equivalent of a sigh. Every time one of the humans used that phrase, trouble followed. Granted. Kenji glanced at his fellow humans, then back at the commander. Sir, the scenario you've described, if the colonists are as hostile as the briefing suggests, and if they've had time to fortify their positions, attempting to extract diplomats through standard de-escalation protocols will likely result in significant casualties among both the peacekeeping force and the diplomats themselves. That's a rather pessimistic assessment, Cadet. It's a realistic one, sir, Amara interjected, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality of sounding both respectful and completely unmoved by authority. She was taller than Kenji, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to calculate angles and trajectories even when standing still. The scenario parameters indicate the colonists have access to heavy weapons and defensive positions. They've already killed 3 mediators. This isn't a de-escalation situation anymore, it's a siege. Dmitri, the largest of the 5 humans, nodded slowly. His pale features and light eyes gave him an almost Cronian appearance, though Vex'thar knew that was pure coincidence of evolution. If you send in conventional peacekeeping teams with restraint protocols, Commander, respectfully, you're sending them to die, and the diplomats with them. Vex'thar felt his dorsal plates rise slightly, an involuntary response to perceived challenge. And what would you suggest, cadets? That we abandon rules of engagement, turn every peacekeeping mission into a massacre? No, sir, Hassan said quietly. The human had a lean build and thoughtful eyes that rarely blinked as often as they should. But there's a difference between unnecessary violence and necessary force. Sometimes mercy isn't about pulling punches, it's about ending a threat so quickly and decisively that everyone else survives. The other cadets had gone silent now, watching this exchange with the kind of attention usually reserved for predator-prey interactions. Aquarian cadets' facets literally rotated toward the humans, light bending oddly through their body. "You're suggesting overwhelming force," Vex'thar said carefully. "We're suggesting proportional response," Yuki corrected. She was the smallest of the humans, barely 1.6 meters, with features that suggested Eastern Asian heritage, whatever that meant on their bizarrely divided homeworld. "The colonists have chosen violence. They've fortified positions, acquired weapons, and killed mediators. They've made their intentions clear. Sending in people with restraint orders is just, well, sir, it's just feeding them targets." Vex'thar's lower hands clenched. He'd read the reports from human military history. Of course, required reading after the first human cadets had entered the academy 15 cycles ago. The wars, the tactics, the absolutely bewildering capacity for both savage violence and rigid ethical codes. But reading reports and standing before 5 young humans calmly explaining the mathematics of overwhelming force were 2 very different experiences. "Your warning is noted," he said finally, keeping his voice level. "However, this is an academy exercise, not a battlefield. The parameters stand. You will enter the simulation with standard peacekeeping protocols and rules of engagement. Dismissed. Prepare for simulation in 30 minutes." The cadets dispersed, chattering in various languages and communication methods. The 5 humans walked together toward the preparation area, their body language relaxed but their voices too low for Vex'thar to overhear even with his enhanced auditory sensors. He should have listened. By all the empty voids of space, he really should have listened. The simulation began at cycle marker 14-0, with 6 teams of cadets, 42 individuals total, entering the virtual environment. The scenario was based on a real incident from 2 centuries prior. A mining colony on the Outer Rim had revolted against corporate oversight, taken hostages including the entire diplomatic corps, and threatened to destroy their fusion reactors if demands weren't met. In the actual historical event, it had taken 3 months of negotiations and a task force of 200 peacekeepers to resolve the situation, 27 casualties, including 11 diplomats. The Academy version was scaled down but maintained the essential challenge: fortified positions, armed colonists, hostages scattered across multiple locations, and a ticking clock before environmental systems failed and everyone died anyway. Team Alpha, led by a promising Krell warrior named Throk, moved in first through the main transit hub. Standard formation, shields up, weapons set to stun. They broadcasted surrender demands, offered negotiations, demonstrated their peaceful intentions by keeping their weapons pointed down. The colonists, controlled by the simulation AI with ruthless efficiency, responded by triggering pre-positioned explosives. Team Alpha lost 4 members in the first 30 seconds. Throk, to his credit, managed to get his remaining team to cover and establish a defensive perimeter, but they were pinned down, unable to advance or retreat effectively. Team Bravo tried a flanking maneuver through the maintenance tunnels. The colonists had mined them. Team Bravo lost their point member, a Vryn whose legs were still technically attached, but wouldn't be once the simulation ended and the pain receptors fully registered what had happened. Team Charlie attempted negotiation through communications channels. The colonists responded by executing a holographic hostage on live feed. It wasn't real, just a simulation, but the Quarian team leader's facets literally cracked from the psychological impact. Vex'thar watched from the observation deck, his mandibles tight. Beside him, Instructor Quelm, a gaseous nethrine contained in an environment suit, bubbled with concern. "They're being torn apart. Should we end the simulation?" "Not yet," Vex'thar replied, though his dorsal plates were rising involuntarily. "They need to adapt, learn." "Commander," another instructor interrupted, pointing at one of the tactical displays. "Team Echo is moving." Team Echo. The 5 humans plus 2 cadets who'd been assigned to their unit, a young Zenthari named Crix and a Cryonian designated Frost. On the tactical display, their icons were moving with purpose, not toward the main objectives but toward what appeared to be a power distribution center on the colony's periphery. "What are they doing?" Quelm burbled. "That area is strategically irrelevant. The hostages are all in." The colony's lights went out. All of them, simultaneously, across the entire simulation space. Emergency systems kicked in after a 3-second delay, bathing everything in dim red emergency lighting that turned the virtual environment into something from a nightmare. They cut the main power, Vex'thar said slowly, his translator barely managing to convey his tone of dawning realization. They deliberately shut down the colony's primary systems, but that will kill everyone, Quelm objected. The life support, the gravity stabilizers, they have backup power, Kenji's voice came through the simulation's communication channel, calm as deep water. 15 minutes on batteries, maybe 20 if they're efficient. Plenty of time. The tactical display showed Team Echo splitting into precise formations. Kenji and Crix moved toward the administrative center, where intelligence suggested the colony leaders were coordinating the defense. Amara and the Krolinian cadet named Frost headed toward the southern hostage location. Dmitri, Hassan, and Yuki converged on the northern complex, where the majority of armed colonists had fortified. This is Cadet Throk to Team Echo. The Krell's voice crackled through the channel, strained from his pinned position. You've blinded everyone. How is this better? We haven't blinded everyone, Amara replied, her tone almost amused. We adapted. You know humans can see in low light pretty well, right? Not great, but good enough. Plus, our equipment has night vision. Does yours? Silence from Throk. Because of course the standard peacekeeping gear didn't include night vision. Why would it? Colonies had lighting. This was supposed to be a peacekeeping mission, not a night raid. The colonists are panicking, Hassan observed, his voice clinical. They're shouting, firing blind, wasting ammunition. Their defensive positions don't mean anything if they can't see what they're defending against. Vex'thar leaned closer to the tactical display, watching the icons move. The humans weren't rushing. They moved with a patience that seemed almost casual, letting the colonists' own fear do half the work. When they did engage, it was swift, precise flanking maneuvers that exploited the darkness, using stun weapons with a proficiency that suggested they'd trained for exactly this scenario despite never having encountered it before. No, Vex'thar realized. They hadn't trained for this scenario. They'd trained for their own species' conflicts on their own world, where apparently fighting in darkness was just something one prepared for. Like bringing water to a desert, Dmitri's voice came through the channel, steady despite the sound of weapons fire in the background. Hostiles neutralized. Northern sector. 17 combatants down, non-lethal force. Hassan, you got the west corridor? Affirmative. 12 more down. They're trying to regroup near the reactor control, but they can't see each other well enough to coordinate. Yuki, what's your count? 8 here, Yuki replied, and Vex'thar could hear the faint smile in her voice. They keep shooting at shadows. One of them actually stunned his own teammate. I almost felt bad. Almost. On the observation deck, Quelm bubbled nervously, his gaseous form swirling in agitation inside his containment suit. This is not standard protocol. They've turned a peacekeeping operation into a successful extraction with 0 friendly casualties. Vex'thar finished quietly, watching the tactical display update in real time. Team Echo's icons moved through the colony like water finding the path of least resistance. Except the path wasn't there before, they were creating it. Moment by moment, adapting to every obstacle with a fluidity that made the other teams look like they were moving through frozen syrup. Kenji and Crix reached the administrative center, where the simulation AI had placed the colony's leadership, the ones orchestrating the hostage situation. The door was reinforced, designed to withstand a direct assault. Kenji studied it for approximately 4 seconds before speaking into his communicator. Amara, you near the environmental controls? 2 minutes out, she replied. Good. When you get there, reroute all remaining emergency power to the administrative sector, then cut it again. 3-second pulse, full intensity, then darkness. Understood. And Kenji, try not to enjoy this too much. No promises, he said, and Vex'thar heard something in that human's voice that made his dorsal plates flatten involuntarily. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. the acknowledgement that sometimes the universe required a particular kind of response, and that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting it. The pulse came exactly when Kenji said it would. For 3 seconds, the administrative center blazed with light right enough to overload visual sensors. The simulation registered 17 colonist leaders inside, all of whom would have been flash-blinded, their adapted darkness vision suddenly overwhelmed by brilliance. Then nothing. Complete darkness again. Kenji and Krix breached during the blindness. The door, for all its reinforcement, hadn't been designed to withstand a Zenthori's four-armed strength combined with a human's understanding of mechanical weak points. They were inside before the colonist leader's vision could even begin to recover. 17 hostiles secured, Kenji reported 30 seconds later. His breathing barely elevated. Leadership captured. Krix, you good? I am. Adequately functional, yes. The young Zenthori replied, his translator conveying a note of stunned disbelief. Cadet Kenji, that was the coordination required. How did you know the door's support struts would fail at that precise point? Engineering classes, mostly. Plus, you know, humans have been breaking into things for about as long as we've been alive. It's kind of our thing. Meanwhile, Amara and Frost reached the southern hostage location. Unlike the others, the human didn't breach immediately. She paused, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper on the communication channel. Frost, how's your aim? Cryonians have exceptional precision at low temperatures, the Ice World native replied, his translated voice carrying a note of pride. Why do you ask? Because there are 4 guards in there, all of them holding detonators linked to explosives around the hostages. In the dark, they can't see us, but they're also jumpy enough to blow everything if they hear a breach. So here's what we're going to do. What followed was a demonstration in trust and cross-species cooperation that would have been heartwarming if it weren't so absolutely terrifying. Amara guided Frost through a ventilation shaft too small for her, perfect for his more compact Trayonian frame, and positioned him above the holding area. Then she created a distraction by knocking on the opposite wall, making the guards turn and cluster together, their backs to Frost's position. 4 stun shots, fired simultaneously at a temperature cold enough to freeze neural pathways before pain receptors could trigger a reflexive detonation. The guards dropped like puppets with cut strings. Hostages secure. Southern sector, Amara reported. Frost, that was beautiful. Remind me to buy you whatever passes for a drink on your homeworld after this. We consume supercooled methane, Frost replied seriously. Right, I'll stick to watching you drink then. The other teams, still pinned down or struggling through their objectives, could only listen as Team Echo systematically dismantled the entire scenario. Dmitri, Hassan, and Yuki converged on the remaining colonist strongholds, using the darkness and the colonists' own paranoia against them. They'd broadcast movement noises from empty corridors, causing the defenders to waste ammunition on shadows. They'd knock on walls and retreat, letting the colonists' imagination conjure threats that weren't there. This is psychological warfare, Instructor Quelm observed, his gaseous form nearly opaque with distress. They're not just defeating the enemy, they're terrorizing them. No, Vex'thar corrected, his mandibles clicking slowly as understanding settled over him like a heavy cloak. They're ending the fight as quickly as possible with minimal casualties on all sides. Those colonists are frightened, yes, but they're alive. None of Team Echo has used lethal force. They haven't had to. Hassan's voice came through the channel, oddly gentle despite the circumstances. Northern stronghold neutralized. All hostiles secured, no fatalities. Commander, you should know, the colonists in here are actually relieved. One of them started crying when he realized we weren't going to kill him. I think they expected something else. What did they expect? Quelm asked, though the question was rhetorical. Yuki answered anyway. They expected what they would have done. Most species, when they commit to violence, they go all in. It's binary, peace or war, negotiation or annihilation. But humans, we have this whole spectrum in between. We can be absolutely ruthless in our tactics, while maintaining absolute control over the outcome. It confuses people. The simulation timer showed 28 minutes elapsed. In the original historical scenario, the peacekeeping forces had been pinned down for 3 hours before reinforcements arrived. Team Echo had extracted all hostages, secured all hostile combatants, and captured the colony leadership in less than half an hour. Total casualties, 0. Total friendly losses, 0. Total structural damage, minimal. Total psychological impact on the instructors watching, immeasurable. Vex'thar ended the simulation and the 42 cadets materialized back in Training Bay 7, their holographic environment dissolving into the standard gray walls and training equipment. The Krell warrior Throk looked shell-shocked, his battle-hardened features slack with disbelief. Team Bravo's Vrin Point member was checking his legs obsessively, still processing the phantom sensation of the mind blast. The Quarian leader's facets were rotating in confused patterns, trying to reconcile what they'd witnessed with everything they'd been taught about peacekeeping operations. The 5 humans stood together, their expressions calm but alert, watching the commander with those soft eyes that tracked everything. Crix and Frost stood slightly apart, looking at their human teammates with something approaching awe. Vex'thar descended from the observation deck, his 4 arms moving through gestures that conveyed his complex emotional state. Approval, mixed with concern, respect, laced with trepidation. He stopped before Team Echo, his primary eyes focusing on Kenji, while his secondary eyes scanned the others. "Cadet Kenji," he said slowly, "you warned me. All of you warned me. I dismissed your concerns as pessimism. Inexperience. I was wrong." Kenji inclined his head slightly, that small human gesture of acknowledgement. "Sir, you weren't wrong to try standard protocols first. In an ideal universe, peaceful resolution should always be the first choice. But the universe isn't ideal. And sometimes mercy means ending the threat so completely that no one else has to die." Vex'thar finished, echoing Hassan's earlier words. "I understand now, but cadets, I must ask, where does it end? If overwhelming force becomes your default response, how do you prevent it from becoming excessive?" Dmitri stepped forward, his large frame somehow non-threatening despite his size. "Sir, that's exactly why it works for humans. We know where it ends because we've seen where it goes when it doesn't end. Our history is full of examples. Wars that spiraled out of control. Violence that fed on itself until entire civilizations burned. We learned, Commander. Sometimes we learned the hard way, but we have rules," Amara added. "Not rules imposed by command, but rules we impose on ourselves. We know what we're capable of, which means we know what we have to control. Every human in combat learns the same thing. You don't use minimum necessary force because someone tells you to. You use it because you've seen what happens when you don't." Yuki's expression was serious now, all traces of humor gone. "The colonists in that simulation expected us to kill them, Commander. You heard Hassan. They were relieved when we didn't. That's not because we're merciful in a soft way. It's because we're merciful in a way that makes them absolutely certain we could have killed them, but chose not to. There's no ambiguity, no room for them to think they could try again and win next time. They know in their bones that the fight is over." Hassan nodded slowly. "In human military philosophy, there's an old saying, no better friend, no worse enemy. We can be absolute nightmares on a battlefield, but that same intensity applies to how we protect allies, negotiate treaties, and work toward peace. It's not separate, it's the same commitment, just pointed in different directions." The other cadets had gathered closer now, listening with the intensity of people witnessing a fundamental shift in their understanding of the galaxy. Throk, the Krell warrior, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "On my world, we have honor duels. Combatants fight until one yields or dies. It is straightforward, understood by all. But what you describe, it is more complex. You fight, not to win glory, but to end the fight itself." "Exactly," Kenji confirmed. "We don't fight because we enjoy it, though some humans do, and that's a whole different conversation. We fight because something needs to end, and we've calculated that fighting is the fastest, safest way to end it. The moment it's ended, we stop. Immediately. No revenge, no making examples, no prolonged punishment. Just finished. Done. Move on to rebuilding. Vex'thar felt his dorsal plates settle into a pattern of contemplation. His species had been warriors once, millennia ago, before they'd evolved past such things, or so they'd told themselves. But watching these humans operate, seeing their casual competence with violence tempered by rigid ethical constraints, he wondered if his people had actually evolved past conflict or simply built societies stable enough that they'd forgotten how to think tactically. The Galactic Council, he said carefully, is not prepared for this. For your species' approach to conflict resolution. They see your capacity for violence and assume you will be a destabilizing force. Amara shrugged, a peculiarly human gesture of acknowledgement and dismissal. Let them assume we'll prove Autorion through actions, not words. Every mission where we end a conflict with minimal casualties, every hostage we extract alive, every enemy combatant who survives to face justice instead of dying in battle. Those are the arguments that matter. And if they still don't trust you, Hassan smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. Then they'll learn what every human child learns eventually. Commander, respect and trust are different things. They don't have to trust our intentions. They just need to respect our capabilities. Trust can come later, after we've earned it. Respect, well, that we've demonstrated today. Vex'thar looked around the training bay, seeing the faces of 42 cadets from dozens of species, all of them processing what they'd witnessed. Some looked frightened. Some looked impressed. Some, like Crix and Frost, looked inspired, as if they'd glimpsed a new possibility for their own species' approach to conflict. Dismissed, he said finally. All teams, compile your after-action reports. Team Echo, your report can wait until tomorrow. I suspect you've taught us enough for one day. As the cadets filed out, chattering in various languages and communication methods, Vex'thar watched the 5 humans walk together toward the exit. They moved with the same casual posture they always had, but he understood it now, not carelessness, but confidence. The absolute certainty that they could handle whatever came next because they'd already handled worse on their own world. Quilm bubbled beside him. That was disturbing. That was effective, Vex'thar corrected. Both can be true, the Nethrine replied. Commander, what happens when the humans encounter a species that doesn't surrender, that fights to extinction rather than yield? What happens when no mercy means something different from what they intended? Vex'thar's mandibles clicked slowly, his translator struggling to convey his complex emotional state. Then, Instructor Quelm, we will learn whether humans truly mean what they say about proportional response, or whether we've invited something into the galaxy that we can't control. And if it's the latter, the commander watched the training bay doors close behind the last of the cadets, leaving him and Quelb alone in the vast space. On the holographic displays, replay footage showed Team Echo's assault in the simulation, precise, coordinated, devastating in its efficiency. 5 humans and 2 inspired cadets, operating in perfect synchronization, dismantling a crisis that had historically required 200 peacekeepers and 3 months of negotiations. If it's the latter, Vex'thar said quietly, then I suppose we'll learn what no mercy actually means from the species that invented the concept. And I pray to whatever gods might listen that we never force them to demonstrate it fully. The lights in Training Bay 7 dimmed to standby mode, but Vex'thar remained, staring at the empty space where the simulation had unfolded, wondering what his superiors at command would say when they read his report. Wondering what the Galactic Council would do with this information. Wondering if humanity's entry into the broader galaxy would be remembered as the moment everything changed for the better, or the moment everyone else realized they'd been playing a completely different game all along. In the corridors outside, Kenji's voice drifted back through the partially closed doors, talking with his teammates about grabbing food from the commissary and maybe studying for next week's orbital mechanics exam. Ordinary conversations from ordinary young adults who'd just demonstrated combat proficiency that would have taken most species decades to develop. The galaxy, Vex'thar reflected, was about to become much more interesting and much more careful about ignoring human warnings.